Excellent. With that, I'd like to welcome to the stage Press Herald publisher Lisa DeSisto and the CEO of the Jackson Laboratory, Dr. Ed Liu.
Thank you, Kate. So isn't it impressive how Kate does that with no note cards? How does she remember it? I'd love to be with her on her drive-in because you know she's rehearsing it, right? So, Dr. Liu, thank you for coming. We are so excited to get to know you and hear about what exactly goes on at the Jackson Labs, because down here in Portland, I think it's a little bit of a mystery. So thank you for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
So let's start where we always do at Like a Boss and finding out about you, and tell us a little, where you grew up.
Well, I was born in Hong Kong and came here on a boat, the USS Cleveland, at the age of 5.
Oh.
Landed in one of the piers in San Francisco, which is now a tourist trap. But it was a landing pad for our family, and I grew up in California.
They should have a plaque there, though, that's where you arrived, right? That could be part of the walking tour of Pier 39.
No.
So when did you first decide that you wanted to become a scientist or a doctor, I think?
Well, actually, both my parents were physicians, so they didn't really, push that on us. But both my brother and I are physicians, and I still remember wanting to be a doctor for as long as I was, thinking about a profession. So probably around 5 years old.
Oh, wow!
Wow. Yeah.
So when I was preparing for this, I was reviewing your CV. It's 45 pages. Now, I think it was Ed McCursey told me your resume should be 1 page. Just a little advice. I should have double-sided it or something. So I don't think we can go through all 45 pages. But talk to us a little bit about your education. So you have a dual degree from Stanford, is that right?
Yeah, this is just an indication of my problem of focusing. So I was a double major in chemistry and in psychology. So it's a little schizophrenic before I went to medical school. So.
And then from medical school, talk about your path really, what you did before you got here to Maine.
So as usual, you go to medical school, and after medical school is internship and residency. And I chose internal medicine. These are building blocks. And then subsequently hematology and oncology, which is a joint boarded subspecialty in cancer. So, and then I spent about 3.5 years in a laboratory. Turns out the gentleman won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of oncogenes, which are these genes in all of us that when mutated would be the instigator of cancers. So it was a profound finding that people used to think that cancer was due to something from the outside in. And what he found was that it's really our genes that have gone awry that causes cancer. So I was very fortunate to be one of 2 MDs working in his laboratory, and was really focused on human cancers at the very nascent phase of molecular biology. After that, I became an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and then subsequently everything else that followed.
And you spent 11 years in Singapore.
Yeah, so I was, an academic. I practiced medicine in a university. I ran the breast cancer program and the clinic there. That was my clinical specialty. And then after that, I was recruited to be the scientific director at the National Cancer Institute. And it was really there that I met George Mitchell.
Okay.
Yeah, and not because...
So he recruited you to Maine.
He recruited me to Maine. He did. Oh, actually, he has a role in it because, I'm a big city boy from San Francisco, and then went to North Carolina. It's not so big city, but Washington, D.C. or Bethesda. But it was there that I did some work with Northern Ireland, just at the time that there was the peace accord took place, and that work, which was to help Northern Ireland cancer community reorganize in a research context, became the NCI, National Cancer Institute All Ireland Cancer Consortium, that still stands today. And the story is that I got a phone call from my boss, who was the institute director, and says, "What are you doing in Ireland?" I said, "I didn't know that was, He says, "Well, why do you want to know?" He says, "Well, Ted Kennedy called me and asked me, what the hell are you doing in Ireland?" And so it turns out that with the Good Friday Accord, both sides were seeking anything that both sides could agree on, and
Sure.
one of which is to cure cancer. So everybody got in it. The Minister of Health of Ireland, who became the Prime Minister of Ireland, George Mitchell was part of it because he was part of the Accord, everybody. And so that's where I actually met George. Now, the reason why this is how it got me here is I was struck by how that little place, I didn't know that it was only 1.2 million people that just captured the pain and suffering of the world, and that the solution that happened in Northern Ireland became the paradigm for reconciliation. And so that's where I realized that if you really want to do something big, you don't start big, you start small, and that becomes a model for how everybody can do things. So in effect, that led me to when Singapore asked me to start the whole genome program for the nation. There were some people who thought that was the end of my career because it's a little dinky rock somewhere. But it was really very important that it was a country that wanted to invest in high science for the economy. And it was an opportunity for me to do high science and yet help a nation achieve their aspirations. The person I reported to was the Minister of Trade and Industry, not the Minister of Science or Minister of Health or Minister of Education.
So it was an economic driver in many ways. Driver, yeah. So then when did the Jackson Labs get on your radar, or had it been on your radar before that?
Well, as a geneticist, you have to know about the Jackson Labs. Nobody in genetics doesn't know about the Jackson Labs, but the Jackson Labs it's as in many entities in Maine, understated, despite its importance. And so unless you were really in the field, you would not have heard of the name Jackson Labs. But when my wife and I were interested in coming back to the United States after 10 years in Singapore, just kind of looking around, and the Jacks called me and asked if, actually when they called me, I thought they had the wrong telephone number because I'm not a mouse geneticist. But they had a vision that they wanted to expand into translational sciences, that is, impact on humans. They clearly wanted the technology of genomics, which then I spent 10 years building. And then because of the business end of JAX, which is now global, they wanted somebody who had a little bit of a global experience. And so I negotiated 3 jobs in one.
Isn't that great? So you hadn't been to Maine before then?
I hadn't, really, I hadn't.
So what was your impression, and what month was your interview?
March 3rd.
Oh.
Singapore.
Hey, no traffic.
No traffic. That was, Singapore, MDI, Mount Desert Island. It's just simply two islands with extreme temperatures.
Right.
So I'm used to that approach. But I think the thing that really impressed me more than anything else was the people, and dedicated, understated, committed to the mission. Everybody in the institution, and that was what sold me, and a commitment to do better. And this is not just a few board members; it's everybody in the institution.
Right. So that was about 6 years ago. Then.
6 years ago.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the lab. So why don't you the mission of the lab?
Well, the mission is to discover precise genomic solutions to human disease. That's one part. The second part is to empower the biomedical community in our shared quest to conquer human disease. So it really, truly reflects what we do at JAX. First of all, we do some pretty profound research of our own. We can talk a little bit about it if we have time. But the second part, which many people know us for, perhaps know us more for, is that we provide the most important models of human disease to the world. Every year, we ship 3.5 million mice to 22,000 labs in 60 countries. So it just shows you the global impact of this small place in MDI.
Well, all right. So since you brought up the mice, so let's learn more. Let's learn more about them. So did you say 3.5?
3.5 million that is shipped out. Yeah.
So right now, how many mice are alive at the Jackson Lab?
Probably around 1.5 million, which is about the same size as the population of Maine.
So everyone in Maine could have a mouse.
You can have a mouse of your own.
Although Kate Simmons was asking you for tips on how to kill them at her house. So.
I told her I'm sending a team over to her house to pick a few up.
Yeah.
You know?
But let's talk about the mice. I mean, they really have to be perfect. They have to,
Yes.
and they have to arrive alive. So the logistics of shipping mice is kind of mind blowing.
Most people don't recognize how much care we take in raising research mice and truly how we're very serious about humane treatment. I mean, there are individuals who might argue that we don't need, research animals, but I have to disagree. We're not at a position where we can just kind of type on a computer and get a solution. So conquering human disease is really our primary focus. But in that process, we have to be good stewards of our, of our products. The mice are extraordinarily important, but one of the key issues is reproducibility of the science. We have unique environmental structures. In fact, our living conditions for the mice are better than if you went to the hospital. It's cleaner.
Yeah.
It's clearly cleaner. I mean, and it's really quite remarkable. And on top of that, we have tools to make sure that there's no what we call genetic drift, so that when we distribute 3.5 million mice this year, it'll be exactly the same genetic footprint as 5 years ago. And that has taken a lot of effort over the years to get that kind of perfected.
And it's also thousands of strains, correct?
So we have almost 10,000 different strains, which is, by the way, we're probably the only institution in North America that has that kind of collection. No for-profit entity, we're a not-for-profit organization, no for-profit entity would ever do something like this. For those of you who create products, you can imagine if you were to create 10,000 different products and try to distribute 10,000 different products, how difficult that is. Most companies would rather not do that. But because we have a higher, we have a mission that we have to fulfill, we do it to a degree at a loss.
And I'm sure there's a ridiculous amount of focus on keeping the labs clean. So I know people are talking about the flu, right? And so if you don't feel well, you should stay home. And it has to be, times 1,000 at the Jackson Labs, right?
Well,
in terms of keeping your staff healthy when they're working with the mice.
Well, keeping our staff healthy is for different reasons than our mice. I mean, we really care about our staff very, very much. But for example, our animal care workers all wear gowns and they're masked. They go through what we call air showers. They take off all the clothes, the street clothes, and change into sterile gowns. So, I'm fortunate. I mean, I'm a physician. I didn't shower before I went into a patient's room. And, but we do that for the mice.
It's a whole different level. How much do the mice cost?
Well, that's proprietary, isn't it? No.
Well, because I know you can order them online.
No, you can. I'm just being facetious. It ranges depending on the complexity of we actually craft mice genetically for particular purposes, anywhere from $20 to $2,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And how do most people order them? Do you order them like by the pair, by the dozen?
It just depends on,
what you're doing?
it depends on what our clients want. You can order them by what we call breeding pairs, which is male, female, or you can order them, it's really bespoke. You just tell us what you need. We have an entire, you can't imagine the infrastructure we have just to support this. Our customer, phone people, the majority of them have PhDs.
Wow.
Because it's so highly specialized. And then we have our own logistics. We have a mathematician, a lady from Bowdoin, who graduated from Bowdoin in mathematics, who's now runs all our logistics, it's all done by special trucks that we work with our vendors. And every box is tagged with barcodes. It's all computerized. Every truck has a GPS, and trucks do have that now. But we track really where every truck goes, so that if there are any stalls, we're able to actually, go in on it. The transport is highly specialized. We have hydrogels, by the way, produced by a Maine producer, Clear H2O. Everything had to be optimized tremendously. And it's one thing that's an aside, not so much as an aside, it's really important. It's been calculated that Jackson Labs brings in $700 million in economic activity to Maine. That's not what we bring in, but that's the activity.
Yeah.
But about every year, we bring in cash coming into to Maine, about $220 million. Okay, we're a traded industry, which means the money that we get are all from outside in.
Yeah.
And when we have these resources that come in, they go into the pockets of our employees because they deserve it. But we use, as best as possible, vendors from Maine. So 600 Maine vendors work with us. And some of them have really done fantastic, partly because of us. Clear H2O started as a dinky little company, and now, because we said your hydrogels are the best, everybody's using them.
Right.
We have a pellet plant that supports 75% of our energy in Bar Harbor, 75%. And Maine Wood Pellets is our distributor, and we do millions of dollars of business with them. So
that's amazing, and I think really that deserves a round of applause. We really appreciate that commitment to our economy. Talk about your workforce. You have 2,000 employees, but they're not all in Bar Harbor. You have some other campuses?
So we have, like I said, almost 2,200 employees. About 1,500 are in Bar Harbor. So I think we're stretching the limits of how the island can actually withstand that weight. But we really value our employees. Interestingly, 54% of our employees are females.
Oh, right. Well, wow.
Yeah.
That's another one. We don't clap all the time at Like a Boss, so that's impressive.
We have just a fantastic workforce, and the commitment they have is it's astounding. One of my proud moments is when I give these service pins, and the last employee day we had, I gave two 40-year pins and one 45-year pin.
Wow.
It's amazing. And one of the proudest things that I think we have is our employee education. We pay their education. Not for any school, of course. Bowdoin's very expensive. And so
but worth it.
But worth it. Very much. So's Colby and Bates. But we since it started in about 2000, we paid for the education of 1,200 of our employees. This year we have about 135 employees actively in this, of whom 54 are getting their bachelor's degree first-time bachelors, okay,
Oh, wow.
with us. 19 are getting masters, 19 are getting MBAs, one's getting a PhD, paid for by us. And we have, this is one way we give back to our workforce, because the only thing they have a job, and they're going to be better at the job that with us. But if they should leave, they're going to be better in the next position that they take as well.
Well, so you're certainly the largest employer in Hancock County, for sure.
Hancock and Washington, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And the 21st largest employer in Maine.
And what's the breakup of scientists versus what's the rest of the staff look like?
So if you just talk about Bar Harbor, a third are science-oriented, just a third.
Okay.
And the remainder are what we call sales, production, service, and so forth. So because we've done so well, because of our workforce, we decided summarily in 2006 to raise our minimum wage from $10 an hour to $15. And just to show you we're not some ivory tower, 850 of our employees got a pay raise. Of course, there's compression issues and what have you, but 850. So we're not talking about, high-end PhDs and MDs and what have you. We're talking about, rank and file workers who, are getting a decent wage now.
Yeah. So, I mean, it really has transformed the economy up there for sure.
Yeah. Well, we're very proud of that.
Yeah, as you should be. Yeah. So let's talk about you as a leader. What are the core principles that guide your actions?
Well, certainly integrity, which means honesty. But honesty doesn't mean you tell somebody you look terrible today. A little diplomacy helps as well. Integrity, transparency, which is part of integrity. Fairness, which doesn't mean, like Solomon, that you always do the right thing for everybody. And I think decisiveness, and I think one of the key issues I find about leadership is that the best leaders are always the ones that balance the extremes of characteristics. For example, we are really devoted to excellence and to one team. Okay, all right, or collegiality. Well, sometimes pushing excellence, you gotta cut the slackers. Is that collegial? We have to balance those things. If you're collegial, then will you just give somebody who isn't doing very well some slack? Yes, you do, but only to a certain extent. So that balance, I think, is really important, and that requires decisiveness. You have to make decisions, and so those are my core principles.
And then talk about your leadership team. So you walk in as a physician, a research scientist, and now you're also the CEO. So how much time do you spend driving the research and spending time thinking about about the research versus running the company?
Well, to be honest with you, we're all about research. Everything we do is about research. It's a pyramid of functions for research, from the blue sky innovation piece to supporting researchers through our services and our products. Okay, so maybe I can revoice that by saying our entire senior management team is focused on innovation and research, but in different formats, of that. Obviously, I spend a lot of my time in sort of the administrative aspects of things, but administration is simply a tool to get at the end, just as much as when I read a scientific paper, how do I get at the end? I have to be able to implement it. And administrative frameworks is how you implement on a larger scale, which is what we do. So I don't make a distinction between my administrative work or my management work and the science work. Now, if you talk about my personal science, that's a different story. I have a lab still,
right?
And I force myself to be much more narrow in terms of the focus, instead of much broader that I used to do before. And I've given up any hope that I'm going to win the Nobel Prize. simply because there's not enough time in the day to do that type of work. But that, I think, to be honest with you, I spend only about, I would say, less than half a day a week on that myself.
In your own
My
lab.
own lab.
In your own lab. So let's go back to your leadership team. So who are the people around the table when you have your core leaders?
Well, some of them are here. I think Katie Longley and Luann Ballesteros. There they are.
Yeah.
Katie, this is why I love going to work.
Okay.
And my colleagues are just fantastic. They're both are really devoted to Maine. Katie was the chief operating officer for Bowdoin. That's why I keep making these Bowdoin jokes.
So you can get away with the Bowdoin jokes, yeah.
And Luann is a Mainer through and through and has done some fantastic work in Maine with the government as well. So we have 10 individuals. That's a little big for a senior management team, but we're a very complex organization. And I really want to have all the voices, when appropriate, to talk about. So, of course, we CFO, COO, Chuck Hewitt, Luann, who does the government affairs. We have development and advancement. We have all the scientific directors. So it's heavily weighted to the science, who are there and so forth. So education.
And did you build that team, or were some of them already? Yeah, did you?
Well,
how was that
the structure is inherited, but as of today, only one person, that's Chuck Hewitt, of the 10, was there when I arrived. Okay, and by the way, it's not because I cut anybody's heads off or anything, but there's a natural attrition, and people retired, people moved on. Some were encouraged to move on, but it was all amicable, I think.
Collegial. It was all collegial. Yeah. So, talk about your team or recruiting talent. So are there any positions that you really struggle to fill? But it sounds like a great place.
6 years ago, I would have said, we do have some challenges. Today, I don't think we have challenges.
Yeah.
I really don't. And here's the value proposition, okay? If you are a geneticist focused on systems genetics, and we can talk about what that means, and your main model system that you use, by the way, the majority of biological research use the mice in one way or the other. If your main vehicle is the mouse, there is no place in the country that you can find better than here. So I usually make the analogy to NASA. Cape Canaveral is a pretty swampy, ugly place. But if you're an astronaut, where else are you going to go?
Right.
And so we are the rocket scientists of mouse genetics.
I like that. But you're not suggesting Bar Harbor's swampy.
No.
I mean,
it's rocky. Actually.
and lovely, certainly. What about so if you are recruiting a scientist, and do you have any issues with dual career families?
So a little bit hyperbole in saying that. Yeah, but let me just say that when I was in California, we had a problem. Nobody could afford a house. So every jurisdiction, every venue has a problem. We just kind of have to work around it. And one of the things we have to work around in Bar Harbor is the spousal issue. Nowadays, many spouses are also professionals, and so to find the matching profession is also really difficult. Now, having said that, this is why I'm a big proponent of good high-speed transport as well as high-speed internet, because that is, in fact, when we have spouses that are working remotely, that's how they work remotely.
Right.
Because they'll fly, to some place periodically, and on a daily basis, they're doing everything by computer.
But the two-scientist family would be a dream.
In what sense?
Well, just if you had a married couple and they were both scientists, that would be the best.
Well, if they're both good.
Yeah. Yes.
We do have problems sometimes when they're not.
That's great. So So let's talk about the research before we go to questions, because I think that's so important. I mean, a lot of people think about the Jackson Lab for your excellence in the mouse world, but there's a tremendous amount of important research going on
just
up there
just
as
to
well.
give you an example, we're the only National Cancer Institute designated cancer center. I'm the cancer center director. We are one of 6 aging centers in the country. We're one of 4 Alzheimer's model centers in the country. I can go on and on. This is just in a little dinky town of Bar Harbor, I mean, it's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
So our work is really what I would call, we're really focused on only these 2 terms. It's complex genetics and functional genomics. Genetics is a study of genes and how they affect your body or your physiology. Genomics is a study of all genes simultaneously and how they affect your body and disease. So it's genetics on steroids. And functional genomics is, rather than reading the landscape of the genome, is actually assigning function to every nucleotide that is actually there.
I got it. You
Okay.
kind of lost me.
Okay, sorry.
I'm just going to be perfectly honest. But sorry, is anybody else?
No, but you have 3 billion base pairs. That is, your DNA is registered in an alphabet of 4, A, T, C, G. And it's like a book. It's like a book fixed at 3 billion letters. So you can imagine, that's finite. But the complexity of how you combine those letters makes it nearly impossible to do predictions unless you reconstruct it and you put it in either a cell or in an animal and then test what the changes actually do. Okay, so using that as the fundamental principle, and by the way, we can engineer the genomes now. To give you some examples, just recently FDA approved a drug called Spinraza, which is to treat the Lou Gehrig's disease of kids. It's the same terrible disease, progressive paralysis. But you can't test that. You can't study it in a test tube. It is actually a whole body problem. So what our scientists did, Kat Lutz, was to work with other scientists across the country to truly perfect the mouse model for it. Understand when the degeneration occurs so that we had a window of time, and then use the mouse model to then test the drugs from a drug company that subsequently got acquired by a pharma company. Turns out it worked beautifully, but it had to be done in a very narrow window of time. Because of that, they moved into phase 2 clinical trials, and it worked. Okay, and because of that work up here in Bar Harbor, it was approved. Okay, but that's one disease of many that we have. Several exciting things are happening now. The whole Alzheimer's program is being reconstructed at Jackson Labs. I mean, the national Alzheimer's approach. You can go into a lot of details, but instead of attacking Alzheimer's as a disease, molecularly as a disease, which occurs, but every one of us here already has the beginnings of those signatures of Alzheimer's. But it's actually the resilience. A lot of people here will, even with those tangles in your brain, will not lose memory. And that's because there are other factors in you that prevent that from happening. And several of our scientists very recently have uncovered a number of genes that actually enhance the resilience, and also showed that inflammation, neuroinflammation, is actually one of the causes. And these inflammatory responses can be modified by exercise, by diet, and we believe by drugs as well. So that it's really very exciting.
That is very exciting and so relevant for our state and our population. Talk for a second about the Maine Cancer Genomics Institute.
So, initiative.
Thank you.
So, we have moved, our research you heard was heavily the mouse, but in the last 6 years, we've moved directly into the clinical space. And a lot of it was spearheaded by our campus in Connecticut, which is only focused on the human, but much of it is, interfacing with here. So we have a a very strong cancer group, science that I won't have time to talk about. But one of the things we did was develop a clinical genomic test for testing the genomes of cancers to give a roadmap of how you should treat it, okay? Now, other groups are doing that, but what we did was, in collaboration with the Alphon Foundation, who's just fantastic, we spent $15 million setting up the whole facility to be able to do this and the infrastructure, but they gave us $8.4 million so that we can apply it in Maine. So why this is that we have great clinicians really here. But because we're in Maine, 1.5 million people, we're always in the lagging edge of innovation. Mm-hmm. They always start in Boston and LA and San Francisco, and then as an afterthought come up. Well, we decided we wanted to change that. And so one of the issues here was that allowed us to give 1,800 tests of these advanced tests to all to cancer patients in Maine. But the key component of this is to get all the clinicians together. And right now, 80% of all oncologic clinicians in Maine are party to this. They're learning how to use this test. We're doing a feedback loop where we're learning how to advance these tests so that they can be used much better in a rural setting. I'll give you an example. A lot of this has to be done on a collaborative basis. In other words, it's like your doctor just can't this is so complex that you can't just read a report. You got to talk about it. So Jens Ruder, who's our medical director, did a thing called the Genomic Tumor Board. And we do it using online material, but he goes from hospital to hospital across Maine. It's like Prairie Home Companion, where you go to a town in Nebraska and you broadcast it, through the, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fantastic. And what it does is it raises the level of understanding of this very high technology in Maine, and I'm very proud that we're the instigator of it.
So really, for anywhere in Maine, they're getting access to this network and learning.
Yes.
And collaborating. That's tremendous. So, are we ready for questions, Amy? Where are you? Is it time for questions? Okay.
Got a microphone here.
Let's do that. Oh.
Nice job, Ed.
Well, that's Luann Ballesteros.
I'm Luann, yes.
I pay her to say those things.
I hope so.
Your paycheck didn't arrive?
So I'm Luann Ballesteros, and I am here with Ed and my colleague Katie and my colleague Nancy. And my first question is actually for everybody in the audience. I'm wondering if you'll all join me in singing Happy Birthday to Ed.
Oh, today's your birthday! Oh.
I'll start, but don't wait long to jump in with me. All right? Ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Happy birthday to you.
I can't believe it's your birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ed. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. As Jack Benny said, being 39 is great.
I can't believe it's your birthday. That's awesome.
My mother couldn't believe it either. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Robin, and I am the proud mother of a Jack's Labs, worked in Jen Trowbridge's lab.
Oh, really?
So she had
saw her, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Had a phenomenal experience. It's just a great place. This is American Heart Month, and I understand, even though you're so well known for the work you do in cancer, that you're also doing some research on the heart, and I'd love to hear it.
Yes, absolutely. And really, it's spearheaded by our scientific director for the Bar Harbor campus, absolutely stunning scientist, Nadia Rosenthal, who, by the way, this is actually returning. We have a number of returning scientists, people who have had roots in Maine and are now returning.
Oh, great.
She spent, since she was 5 years old, every summer in Sutton Island. But her work and work of some of the others in the laboratory is around heart regeneration. Some of the earlier work by Bev Pagan was to understand the genetics of cardiovascular disease, and it's done fantastically. We know a lot more about it than we have before. But the big challenge right now is how do you regenerate the heart after you have a heart attack, right? And so she's done some very remarkable work, and you'll be surprised how much of it is genetically based to identify the genetic resilience factors. There's some people who have a heart attack and they recover very well, and others, they have terrible heart failure. We find that genetics plays a big role as to the healing process, and part of that is really looking at things like stem cells, the recovery factors, and so forth. So that's ongoing right now.
I didn't. We have a microphone if you want to go to questions. I didn't give you a chance to talk about your new facility in Ellsworth.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Again, we're doubling down on Maine. We believe in this state and the workforce here. So we're putting up, and thank you for, we just
all
received.
Voted for it.
Thank you. The MTI just, the R&D $50 million, we received $12 million. Vet Choice was the next one with 9. And this goes to our $130 million facility in Ellsworth. So we're putting that of our own money into Ellsworth to build out truly on an international scale the state-of-the-art, what we call production facility for animal models. And the most humane, the most clean, the most efficient, in terms of producing the appropriate models for research. What it will do also is put 300 jobs in, not quite 300 jobs in Ellsworth as well. So.
And that's scheduled to open this summer?
It's scheduled to open this summer, but of course it's a scaled thing. We're not going to just, and simply even transferring the mice takes years to be able to do that.
Wow. Question?
Yes.
I don't have a question. I have an endorsement. My name is Perry Clark, and I'm the chair of the External Advisory Board to the Institute on Aging at the University of Pennsylvania. The University of Pennsylvania has quite an extensive research program in neurodegenerative disease. And I would like to think that they've made some breakthroughs in neurodegenerative disease, but they could not do it without Jackson Labs. And I have been told by the director of the Institute on Aging at Penn and the director of the Center for Neurodegenerative Disease Research at Penn that Jackson Labs is absolutely vital to their efforts. So I'm here to endorse you and to thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was your birthday present, by
Thank
the way.
you.
Yeah.
It is. Thank you.
Hi, Ken Blaschke. My question for you is the cost of sequencing the genome, how that's changed over time, and when do you think each of us will be able to go to the doctor with our sequenced genome? When will the cost hit that?
Let me just answer the last one first. You can do it now. Well, actually, okay, so it's a very, very good question. To sequence the first human genome was a 10-year effort for $3 billion. It was so-called completed, it's not quite, but at 2003. Fast forward to today, if you just talk about reagent costs, I can sequence your genome for, depending on what sequence, anywhere from $400 to $1,400, anywhere from 36 hours to 3 days. It's just unbelievable. And you know about Moore's law, Greg Moore, Intel, and said every year the number of transistor elements in a motherboard increases by 2, right? And that moved us from the cathode tube to e-business. Nobody would ever, or virtual reality and all those sort of things, gaming online, nobody would ever figured that out knowing the fundamental principles. You know that the sequencing costs, if you plot it, exceeds Moore's law, okay? Which means that the amount of information we're getting is such that I'm not even sure 5 or 10 years from now what we're going to be able to conceive of. It's that imagination that's there. So in truth, if you want to talk about just simple exomes, these are technical terms, you can do it right now, and I can tell you the companies that you can do it in. The problem is, and this is why Jackson Lab is so important, only a fraction of that information we can even interpret. The rest of it is kind of tea leaves still at this time.
Ed, Bill Harwood, as a proud alumnus of the lab's summer program, I'm particularly interested in education. And can you tell us what the lab is doing to promote education, math and science education in Maine at both the high school, college, and graduate level?
Well, I thank you very much, and we're very proud of our summer program, which is in its 90th year, by the way.
Wow.
And the first time it was intense, and now now it's a mansion that they go to. Very, very proud of it. Our strategy, though, is very different than a university, and it is focused on modular, reusable, punctated, lifelong learning. Okay, and in fact, the surprising thing is that's where all our young people are moving towards. And we have moved in terms of doing online modules, but match it with experiential. So what I mean by that is most of our programs are short, like a few days to a few weeks, like the summer program. They're punctated because we know we can't accomplish everything, so we want to be the best in some things. The summer program was installation where 30 young kids, now young meaning high school to college, live, work, and play in a home, a mansion just about very close to the lab, and they work in the labs during that period of time. It becomes a social function tied to intellectual growth, and as you know, you may have heard, 3 Nobel laureates got their first science experience at the lab in this framework, and we play a big role in the main science fair. Really help distribute about $800,000 worth of scholarships and what have you. Help with the judging and everything. We work with the whole Maine Cancer Genome Initiative. Mm-hmm. The major part of that is the education piece. Right. Educating or working with the clinicians and raising their standards. And a very important part of our philosophy is to teach the teachers, teach the experts. To teach the experts, our 2-week genetics course is one of the core courses that Johns Hopkins used to train their first-year graduate students. The teach the teachers, and you may know that we have a summer program for about 2 weeks where Maine high school biology teachers come and work in a special lab to understand the genomic tools, the genetic tools that we have. And then they go back with a tool set that we called Teach the Genomic Generation to help them propagate those concepts. Yes?
Good morning. I'm Victoria Foley with New England Cancer Specialists, and I say that because Dr. Christian Thomas is heavily involved with the MCGI and the Genetic Tumor
Christian.
Board.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for what you're doing to bring that kind of research firepower, if you will, to community oncology. As you know, we're a smaller business in the world of cancer, but we're pretty committed to research, and you guys make that possible. Could you speak a little bit to the benefit of working with community oncology? I know you mentioned hospitals, but doctors who may not be associated with a hospital or working on their own.
Well, first of all, Christian Thomas is probably the pioneer and the vanguard of the MCGI. We call it MCGI. He's fabulous. And by the way, when I say hospitals, it's really, the reality is so many doctors now work for hospitals, but it's really at the doctor level, right? So here's my thought. technology is not the problem these days. The technology is so powerful. It's really applications and dissemination of the technologies that's the limiting factor. And so what we are working with the MCGI, the Maine Cancer Genome Initiative, is to attack that dissemination problem. And the health disparity, we talk about ethnic disparities, but there's a geographic and economic disparity, and we see that in Maine. So that what we think that our experiment is doing is to assist, the government, the insurance companies, as to how we can disseminate these high-end technologies in rural settings, which I believe is extraordinarily important. It's part of this bringing the disparities closer to parity.
I know you have a big event coming up in Bangor with Senator Collins related to Alzheimer's. I'll let you give that a plug. It's your birthday. It's my birthday gift to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. February 23rd, the Alzheimer's Society of Maine and Jackson Labs and Senator Collins' office is coming together to give a small discussion about Alzheimer's, where we are, but importantly, where we are vis-a-vis the state of Maine and the people in Maine. Senator Collins is a tireless champion of science, certainly a tireless champion of Maine. We're so grateful to her. And she had really pushed increased funding for Alzheimer's disease research, of which we are one of the beneficiaries of that largesse.
Great. I have to wrap up with a couple of my classic like a boss questions, which would be, what keeps you up at night?
Used to be kids, but really two things, okay? One is external, one is internal. I'm pretty much a data-driven sort of guy, make my decisions based on data, and I'm just troubled by decisions being made on both sides of the aisle that are belief-driven and not data-driven, and it's hard because we're recipients of those policies. The second is internal, and that is the absence of boldness.
Of boldness.
Boldness.
Yeah.
Jax is a wonderful place, but it's like the tree that falls in a forest and nobody's there. Nobody knows, So
we know now, though.
We do.
We do.
But it's really, we all have to be bold. We have to take chances. Things move too fast. Everything moves too fast, and you just sit around. It's not status quo. You're actually falling backwards in a world that moves fast, so fast. My colleagues at the senior management team, they've all been, really recruited because they're bold.
Yeah.
They're bold.
What's the proudest advancement you've been part of over the course of your career?
Well, besides Jackson Labs, that's still a work in progress. The two proudest moments are really Ireland and Singapore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because in both situations, as an individual working in an institution, I was able to change a country's trajectory.
Which is amazing.
Which is really amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's rare that you have that opportunity, that you're not, let's say, the prime minister or anything like that. Being a scientist, to be able to do that and feel like you're doing that, I think is a great gift.
And then talk about your main. So when you're not at the lab, what do you like to do?
I play piano.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. So
I understand you're quite accomplished. So
No,
next time you come, you're going to have to play for us.
no, I'm very good at hiding my faults. So
Well, it doesn't seem that way. It doesn't seem that way at all.
I love music. I've always played multiple instruments, but mainly piano. And then around when I was 13, I just caught, being in San Francisco, I really began to love jazz. And so my brother and I, he's an anesthesiologist, we formed a group when we were in high school, junior high to start out with. And our first gig was to a retirement home. And at 9 o'clock, everybody went home, and we just thought they didn't like us.
Going.
Yeah, but they wanted to go to bed, you know. And
well, you should get the band together with your brother, because there'd be a lot of gigs you could play in Maine, right?
Well, actually, as it was mentioned, I did this thing, art and science, and my bassist is Basile Tarquini, who's a Swiss scientist who joined us. So we wanted to make it non-professional, and of course, it does sound non-professional, but it's so much fun. I do some composition as well and things like that. So.
Wow. Well, we can't thank you enough for joining us on your birthday and giving us a peek into the important work that Jackson Lab is doing, really, to have an impact to change our lives, but also really improve the lives of so many here in Maine. So we thank you so much and wish you the happiest of birthdays.
Thank you. Thank you.